Welcome to the February 23rd meeting of the Fiscal Management Committee. Before we get started, I'm just going to do a quick introduction or let our folks introduce themselves. And I'll start with my fellow committee members, Dr. Daca.
Good afternoon, Judy Daca.
And welcoming our new member of the committee, Dr. Jaffes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. Hello, everybody.
And then we'll start with our team from facilities and operations and finance, Dr. Dawson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jeannie Dawson, Chief of Finance and Operations. Thank you for letting us be here today.
And Mr. Riley.
Hi, everybody. Rob Riley, Associate Superintendent of Finance.
And Ms. Bergstresser.
Hi, everyone. MJ Bergstresser, Supervisor, Internal Audit Unit.
And Mr. Adams.
Hey, good afternoon. Seth Adams, Director, Department of Facilities Management.
And Mr. Clausing.
Good afternoon. Tom Clausing, Assistant to Rob Riley.
And Ms. Dubois.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rachel Dubois, Director in the Department of Materials Management.
Okay. So first things first, does anybody have any additions to or modifications to today's agenda?
No.
Okay, seeing none. Any corrections to the informational summary from our November 15th meeting? Okay, so we are just going to move right into the meat of the meeting. The first thing that we're going to be talking about is looking at the impacts of supply chain, labor cost increases, inflationary pressures on our CIP and operating budgets, and particularly in light of our need to come up to be talking about some possibly some non-recommended reductions to the CIP, which is not an unusual thing that the county asked us to do, but just to sort of plow the road for some of the things we're going to be talking about in the near term. And I think I'm turning it over to Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Chair Harris. So forgive me that this is mostly going to be a oral presentation and certainly open to questions. We are scheduled to provide a more in-depth update tomorrow to the full board to discuss, the CIP from where we left off from the board's request to ultimately where we are with council discussions. But I did think it was important to share a little bit of the detailed background of the state of the CIP in light of where we're headed in discussions around possible delays, deferrals, and other modifications to the CIP. I would say, a lot has changed since the last time we met to talk through the CIP. We certainly went through the challenging times of Omicron, and that while we struggle with that certainly from a school district standpoint, our construction firms and teams equally struggled with everything from people power issues to increased supply chain challenges. So we are lucky to say that we only had a few projects that were midstream in terms of construction that were really impacted by this particular instance. Many of our other projects are just at the early stages of planning or the initial stages of construction, so we're not seeing the same type of impacts, delays, or cost impacts. But it is something that we have to acknowledge and we have to talk through and understand. I can say projects like the Gaithersburg number 8 project is currently on track to open. It will open, but it will be at the very tail end of the summer before that project opens due to some of the delays. The same goes for Kennedy High School addition project. But one of the projects that I really want to highlight that really has been caught sort of in the early stages of this issue is the Woodward High School project. So as we're in the beginning stages of demolition, earthwork, And ultimately, if you recall some of the redesign efforts to reduce costs, we have experienced some serious both manpower and supply issues on that project. And we're working with the construction teams to see ultimately what the costs will be to accelerate, to finish on time, but also to look at other options of possibly, seeing some form of possible delays. And I say possible delays because that project is a huge project in terms of where we are with current county funding and the implications over the next several years. And you may have all heard, from some of the sound bites that the county executive did recommend a budget that was above the board's request. But I would also say that while that is true, in the first 3 years of the CIP, the budget also represents approximately a $200 million reduction in your request. So a $200 million reduction in the first 3 years of the CIP does represent significant shifts and significant pivoting from where we had previously left off from a board request. So projects like Woodward, projects like Northwood, projects like Crown, which are our big dollar high school projects, are certainly part of the conversation in terms of how we manage the county shortfalls in both bonds and how to pay, or with the revenues to pay the bonds and some of the other competing interests. So I felt that was important to state. I would also say that for clarifying purposes, the Board of Education does not vote on non-recommended reductions. The Board of Education made a request and the Board of Education does not change that request. So any of the reductions to align with the county executive budget is more at the staff level. We look at what actually can fit. What can we fit, within our projects, within expenditures in order to, meet that budget. And then obviously that can change once it gets to the county council. So that letter of non-recommended reductions is making its way over to the county council. And certainly we will be prepared to talk in great detail about what were some of the options or solutions to be able to balance the budget. But I would say Woodward with a delay is one of those options, but it's also to recognize that it may have ultimately seen a delay regardless of the county revenue because of the challenges that we faced through both supply chain and manpower shortages on that project. So that is one I really wanted to highlight. A few other things that I did want to highlight from the perspective of where we are in both supply chain inflation and just manpower issues is our systemic projects, our HVAC projects, our roof projects. We are well planned this year for those projects to continue. But I would say, that they are seeing, as bids come in, 200+% costs above normal averages. So projects, that certainly were costing 1.5 million years ago are exceeding 3.5, approaching $4 million. And that is absolutely a product of the vendor market. That's a product of vendors not being able to receive the small components in order to build the mechanics behind what we receive. And it is something that we're going to have to grapple with. We are not backing off of our plans. We're actually maximizing our state funds as we work through this, but it is something that we have to recognize because the dollar that we're receiving today is not getting us as far as the dollar received 3 years ago. And projects such as our roof projects, are seeing significant inflation challenges, but they're also probably more so than some of the other components. They're seeing significant time delays of procuring materials. Our roofing projects, if we don't start a year in advance on our projects, they will not have materials in order to complete that work. So a lot of the work that we're starting this summer was bid last spring, and we're obviously following suit for the following two. even though hopefully things do subside slightly, we have to obviously plan for worst case and plan for those extended lead times and higher costs. I would say through this, one of the things that obviously we are not compromising is our quality control. So the board will start to see different methodologies of procurement. We are transitioning to what the state strongly supports as a best value option. So what that means is it ultimately will reflect a two-stage type of procurement. The first stage being a qualification based. And that qualification element will have a portion of everything from safety to quality control to MBE to other criteria that we find very important to managing projects. And then ultimately the second stage is price. So we intend to really open up the market for a very large swath of contractors to be able to work on our projects. But obviously maintain that level of quality so that we can get the best pricing, but also receive the best product. So I wanted to highlight that because we are obviously constantly adapting to try to meet the needs of the current market, both price and quality control from a person power perspective. I guess, the other thing that I would say is there are other major initiatives that we're working on, and we are obviously always exploring other opportunities. So I would just say to the fiscal management team, as we start to have conversations about the CIP, there were many non-school infrastructure projects that we had previously talked about. And while it may not be promising in terms of immediate CIP funding, we are looking for alternative ways to both either finance, but more importantly, complete those projects. So we are exploring things such as public-private partnerships, particularly with our infrastructure projects, should we not receive funding for those projects. Like we talked about the materials management warehouse, we talk about the transportation, bus storage locations, and even our maintenance operations. So I wanted to share that we do have that commitment that we're planning for worst case, hoping for best case, but obviously, plan B is really important in these situations. And we know this work has to continue in spite of unprecedented inflation and other challenging financial constraints. In terms of the operating budget, I know you mentioned that, Chair Harris, in terms of where we are in supply chain. We are still seeing, obviously, when we think about the maintenance side of our work and the operations side, continuing significant increases and continuing significant time delays to receive materials. So I would say completing this year has been incredibly difficult to manage that from a budgetary standpoint. We are working with obviously Dr. Dawson and Mr. Riley in terms of how to mitigate that. But I know Ms. Du Bois is also experiencing obviously similar, but if not more compounded concerns around inflation and other issues with materials. So at this point, maybe, and I hate to put you on the spot, Rachel, but maybe pivot over to you. And if you want to talk a bit about some of the other operational challenges that you're seeing due to supply chain at the moment.
Sure, I can do that. I mean, in terms of just general supply chain, with materials management, the biggest impact, in some of our areas, like just our division of food nutrition services and just the availability of food and the constant changing of vendors and just some of the materials, the trays and things of that nature. When it comes to partnering with construction, as Seth had said, just working through managing the budget with the costs going up with furniture. As we look with Gaithersburg number 8, we're purchasing furniture for Odessa Shannon, and then the addition project at Kennedy High School. So just working closely within, those capital budgets just to make sure we're staying on track. But all of the prices have increased. Just in the furniture, we are doing everything we can to place these orders. I mean, most of all of the furniture orders have gone in, making sure we're set to get things in July or August, but still, trying to keep tabs on those delivery schedules and making sure that we have all those things to start the school year. And then just in terms of general materials for the school system, Seth's correct, prices are going up, but just on materials, books and other things that we're managing with our vendors. The biggest changes we're seeing in prices really around paper and just the availability of paper mills. A lot of the smaller companies with paper just struggling with availability right now and things like that. And the difference in terms of supply chain issues for materials in bulk. So just some of the challenges with our schools is, let me give it scissors as an example, has been back ordered for 8 months, right? So you were buying tens of thousands of scissors for the school system, yet you can still go to the Dollar Tree or Staples and find scissors. But the supply chain issues on the material side really do impact when you're buying hundreds of thousands of materials and that pricing. So I know everyone's heard that already before, but we've seen somewhat of a slowdown in terms of just getting answers back from vendors that it's not available, and it has gotten better in terms of shorter delivery times and things like that, but it doesn't feel it's on a normal schedule. And so things such as summer ordering to get our schools materials ready on time, that's happening now, just so we can kind of anticipate those issues this summer, because we do want our schools to start ordering all the materials they'll need for next school year, starting in the next few months. So we're anticipating those needs and getting those orders in and just managing with the vendors.
The other thing I would add too, on top of what both Seth and Rachel have highlighted, is when we deal with a school system this large and we're ordering in large quantities like that, because of those supply chain issues, you may get a partial order, and we'll get one truck of something that really is 3 trucks. So we may have ordered 27 pallets, but 2 pallets come in. And those have been the ongoing issues all year that we've been working through. And depending on what product it is, it gets better. And then sometimes they'll stop a product that we hadn't even planned on having to be concerned about. So it's just been inconsistency, and it has to do with where the market is and literally what is being brought in on shipping, because shipping from California has affected us on certain products where shipping in Florida may have occurred with fruit or something else. So it's just consistent. And that's really unfortunate at this point, because we thought this would be getting better, and it has gotten better in certain ways, but it is still there. And that's why we continue to work with procurement and procuring multiple vendors for different things, so that we can maintain the levels of the need that we have.
And I guess just to wrap up, a piece around other unexpected situations that have occurred is around the legal side of things, our contract side of it. For major construction projects, I can honestly say I've never seen some of situations developed, and I believe no one obviously has, because the existing contracts written by major organizations are not firm enough to prevent some of the situations that are occurring. And I'll just give you a perfect example. We have contractors that see spikes in material costs or vendor costs and have just walked away from projects. And you may say, how does that happen? There's payment performance bonds, there's bid bonds, there's other bonding protocol in there to protect the public dollar. It has just become incredibly difficult to actually continue forward with the existing protection. So I foresee a complete rewrite of everything around bonding protections around the public dollar as a result of COVID. But one thing that is for sure, for school projects, we don't have the choice to stop and wait and work it out through the legal system. We still have to finish projects. We have to have classrooms ready for students. So we work incredibly hard and are definitely working with our legal department to think outside the box to continue the projects forward, and protect the public dollar at the best ability that we have under the current contractual situation. So I just wanted to highlight that one because I couldn't say in my 20 years of doing this, I've never seen contractors walk away from projects like I have in the past 2 years. It's unfortunate, but I think certainly it's one where it causes everyone to take a step back and say, wait a second, let's not ever let this happen again, and figure out how to protect our interests as a whole, much better from a legal perspective. So with that, I guess we close and certainly open up to any questions.
Thank you. So I will look to my colleagues first. Dr. Dr. Daka, questions?
I guess the only thing that went through my head when you all were discussing this is whether we as a system, or if we know of any other systems that have hedges against inflation. I'm not familiar enough with our sort of financing to understand that right now, but just at a very high level, is there anything we can or should be thinking about to hedge against? The manpower piece is tough, but from the financing side, I'm just wondering if there's any hedges we should be thinking about.
One thing in terms of, I will say this, one thing's in terms of procurement, we piggyback with other counties, but we actually, an example would be most recently, a group of counties getting together between the District of Columbia and Virginia and Maryland to go ahead and form a coalition for procuring health kits. And, that kind of procurement goes on consistently to support when we see these kinds of things happening. How can we move to more of the coalitions or use cooperatives contracting in order to bring prices down and be able to procure in large volumes? So we continue to do those things, and they're very helpful. And the good thing about the different procurement arenas is that we all talk to each other. And, so there's different groups that we are part of. And it really helps in the large procurement of things.
So
And then if I could, sorry, if I could just jump in on the investment side. So our investment policy doesn't really allow us to invest in hedging opportunities. What you're speaking about, Dr. Jopis, it's really for maintaining liquidity and to get a decent return, but we don't have those options from the investment side and our operating investments.
Just one last point about, thanks, Mr. Riley, but Dr. Dawson, your point, I know smaller districts frequently are in these co-ops, and I just wonder whether you think that would be worth pursuing. I know you're saying we're part of that, or some of those already. I just wonder if that's something we should formalize a little more. I think it could also protect us against some of the things Mr. Adams was talking about with contractors just walking off the job. If you're in a co-op with, several area regional districts, that it would be hard. It feels like that would be much harder to do that. But I don't know if you can even do that for construction type projects, can you?
There are some co-ops that exist for different components. We routinely look to co-ops for, some of our outdoor, play fields and outdoor, playground perspective and those sorts of things. But when you think about an individual project, there really isn't much. It's sort of a catch-22. The bigger the projects, let's say we start to look at if you bundle multiple projects, you get larger companies that can maybe sustain the inflation issues a bit more. but there's only a few companies that have the bonding capability to actually perform, with that scale. So the pool of competition narrows down. Essentially, your costs go up a little bit when you have less competition. So it's sort of a catch-22 in those situations for us. But we are looking at a variety of avenues to protect ourselves. One being, again, this notion of providing everything from not only contractor but also subcontractor, intended subcontractor, and what is their past 3 years, what does their financial sheets look like, so that we can get an idea of who's potentially a higher risk contractor to enter into contract with versus another. So there are different things that we're trying, and I would say, people have said this before, costs are costs. But I think for us to keep doing things the same way and expect things differently, that would just not work, right? So that's why it seems like every week we are changing something that we do from the contracting perspective to stay ahead of some of these curves that we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks. I guess maybe a little bit of follow-up to that, Mr. Adams, looking at we're adapting, we're changing. In addition, in response to market and other pressures, what are we learning? I mean, it's not just us. So I'm guessing this is not just even a regional challenge, but a national challenge. Are we learning anything from how some of our other larger school systems, or maybe not even larger school systems, are sort of trying to deal with some of these issues?
No, absolutely. I mean, we have never more than now are we talking to a lot of different districts around what they're experiencing. I would say construction is very regional. So, while you would expect it to, certain things to be a challenge across the board, and they are true, there are certain regions that have difficulties in certain areas versus others. For us, we're actually in a pretty good region in terms of location to warehouse and manufacturing and the ability to attract contractors. But one thing to really answer your question is a much more in-depth review of material selections, a much more in-depth review of the details that maybe we overlooked in the past that we're now focused on now. So that we mitigate risk. I think, other things that we've learned about this process is that, there's quite a bit that's changing, around us as well. We talk about, even our indoor air quality approach does not comply necessarily with the local code. So, working through how to navigate the changes in the landscape with that of what we're required to do by other legal or state or federal mandated purposes. So I would say there's a lot that we are learning, and I think there's actually a lot that we've learned that we want to partner with our state and local delegates and figure out, are there ways that we can change some of the limiting factors of whether it be law or code that would allow us to be much more successful in the future. One being the bonding element, right? So, we talk with our contractors. Sort of the only ones that are making out in this ones are the bonding companies. And they were designed to protect public entities, agencies such as MCPS, and so certainly that should not be the case, right? So how do you correct that? You correct that through legislation. You correct that through other pursuits and avenues. So we've learned a lot, and we intend to change even more so than what we are now. But in terms of how to mitigate what we're seeing today, it's just everything has to be early and often. You heard from Rachel, furniture. Never have we had to order furniture almost 8 months in advance of a new school opening. And that's unprecedented. And, it creates challenges, but it also, creates opportunities for us to take a step back and say, well, some really good things came out of this. So what do we take forward on the next schools?
Yeah, that's the thing about a crisis, crucible for innovation. Another question is, you were talking about, because of the challenges, especially that we incurred even during the Omicron wave with ongoing projects, the possible timelines getting a little bit longer. We were talking about the big projects like Woodward, and just a little bit about, so Woodward slows, there's a domino there because it's got to get done so that before we can start Northwood, since it's going to be the holding school for Northwood. So how are we making sure that we are sort of keeping those communities really up to date about any time that timeline looks like it's going to stretch out a bit?
Well, I would say nothing's official. So you're hearing it first now that there are impacts. Ultimately, it is now in the county council's hands. If they're able to add more funding, there will be minimal delays. But the reality is there most likely will be delays. So in terms of communications with communities, as the next couple months unfold and we learn more about impacts to individual school projects, we will go out and talk to communities and vet through what these impacts mean to them as school communities, but also as individual families. I would say a project like Woodward and Northwood, I just want to reassure you though, is that if there is a slight delay, we already are talking about how to accelerate some of the phase 2 work, into possibly the end of phase 1, so that Northwood potentially can have more amenities than what they even had before. So we're always looking for a silver lining here in terms of, okay, if there is a delay, is there something that we can do to improve the situation? And that may be provide, additional construction amenities for Northwood during their stay, even though they're losing a year on the overall project. So those are the things that we're looking at and exploring with our architects and our design teams to see what are the possibilities, so that when we ultimately do have the decisions from county council, we can go out and have a really specific, well-informed conversation with our community stakeholders.
Yeah, and so a little bit of follow-up there. So this gets to a niche issue that you and I talked about a week and a half ago. There's a new program at Northwood, the CASE, the Environmental Education 4-year track program there, which does require some dedicated bioscience lab and greenhouse space. And so since the program was new, was not in the visionary stages of the design of Northwood. So is this, upside, make sure that we're able to accommodate the needs of that new program?
Certainly. I think there's, until the day you bid a project, you can always make changes, and there's very little cost implications to that. So yes, even with a year delay, it does allow us to, take a slight step back and relook and see if there's anything that needs to be modified. So certainly we could do something like that.
And I guess my last question, you mentioned, the contractual issues that you've really never seen before with contractors just walking away. And so needing to go back, do a rewrite for some additional bonding protection. So we see what we've learned and build stronger protections. Do you see any of that needing to come from outside the system, like action that would be required at the county or the state level to build in those bonding protections for public projects?
Yes, absolutely. And that is an area where, that's even federal work to have some conversations around how to improve the expectations of that. So it's not only rewriting, contractual requirements, it's also sort of level setting the new expectations moving forward. Because the last thing we want to do is to rewrite legislation and then it cost, a county such as ourselves or a project such as ourselves, significant more dollars just because of unknowns or fear of risk or other items. So, it's twofold. It's legislation, but it's also, really socializing the changes that need to happen with all the stakeholders that are involved.
Okay, thank you. Any, Dr. Daka, Dr. Joftis, any additional questions? Okay, moving on then to our next agenda item, which is taking sort of a comprehensive look at what we're dealing with now is on our operating side with ESSER funding and regular operating budget funding, and how we are tracking those two things. And with one of the things that we've all been talking about for a year now is making sure that when we use those ESSER funds, we are keeping our eye on what are the long-term impacts on their operating side, and being really mindful about, you know, if we're using ESSER funds on infrastructure improvements that are sort of set in time, one-time purchases and that kind of thing. But when we're looking at programmatic things that will require investment to sustain. So what kind of the way we're going to take a little bit of a look at this, just so we can make sure that we are very publicly sharing and transparently sharing how we as a system are making sure to be very, very intentional about that work. And so I think, am I turning this over to Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Ms. Harris. And just, I'm going to use the opportunity. I know Dr. Joftis is new to this committee. I was just going to give a little bit of a background on ESSER as well, too, just to kind of set the stage. So ESSER, it was originally funded under the CARES Act back in March of 2020, and it got extended through 2 additional acts of Congress. So now we have ESSER 1, 2, and 3. So if you can bring up the PowerPoint. All righty. And then next slide, please. So ESSER 1 provided $24.8 million, and that's actually available through September 30th, 2022. ESSER 2, as you can see, that provided $112.2 million, and that's available through 9/30/2023. And then ESSER 3 provides $252.2 million, and that's available until 9/30/2024. So it's a total of $389.2 million, which is about 14% of our operating budget. Now, just to put it in perspective, normally our federal funds cover about 3% of our operating budget. So it's a lot more funding that we usually get from the feds. So the reason they were awarded was for the safe return to schools and to mitigate learning disruption. And those are basically the criteria. And then I guess to put it in perspective related to our operating budget, like Ms. Harris was mentioning, although it's from a budgeting perspective, it is multi-year, we don't consider it recurring funding. So for that reason, we don't have it as part of our operating budget development. At this point, we're looking at this as additional funding, additional funds that we can use. But similar to our recurring operating budget, we do have a commitment on gathering stakeholder input on the use, and we're doing strict monitoring throughout the year on the financial status and the intended effectiveness of our ESSER funds. So for instance, for transparency, these ESSER funds, they do actually appear in our budget book in table 3, where we list our grant funding. But again, we're just doing this for informational purposes to show the amounts that you see listed here. It's also too going to be part of our, and it has been part of our monthly financial analysis and reporting. So if you recall the last monthly financial report to the board, where we look at where we are on a chapter by chapter basis and where we're projected fund balance, you'll see the ESSER funds is there as well too. And our intention is as we kind of move these funds or utilize these funds, we're going to be showing funds available. And if we amend ESSER, that'll be there as well too. And that is one of the flexibilities that we have as the needs change from these purposes of mitigating learning loss and safe return to schools. We do have the ability to amend these ESSER funds, which is going to be good going forward. So more on ESSER. So there's actually 14 criteria that you have to meet one of these 14 criteria, and it's pretty broad, but mainly focuses around mitigating learning loss and the safe return to schools. Also, purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean school facilities. So one new development that occurred, since we talked about this last year, So another funding source, or not funding source, but reimbursement is FEMA. So originally when FEMA came out with their criteria for reimbursing schools for COVID activities, it was very restricted. We put in a project for our signage for about, I think it's about $300,000. Since then, over the last couple of months, they've changed that criteria, and we can actually use it now for reimbursement of masks and reimbursement of testing kits, which we are in the process of creating projects for that as well too. But with that said, obviously you can't use FEMA reimbursement for something that you're getting ESSER funding for. So we have to be very cognizant of that. But we're using that in our strategy of helping to gain all the reimbursement or all the funding that we can get for these purposes. So that's something that we're working on now, and we'll keep you abreast of those developments as well. So in addition to the 14 allowable uses, and the reason I bring that up is because many times you'll hear folks in the community say, hey, you're asking for a lot of money in the budget. Why don't you just use your ESSER funds? But we're limited to those criteria and for those reasons. So it's not as easy as just saying, hey, we're going to put any excess we need into ESSER, and then all of a sudden we have those funds available. So we have to meet those criteria for that. And also too, with that said, we're looking at these as multi-year funds. So we don't want to use all of our ESSER fundings, which we may need in the future, in year one. So in addition to those requirements, one of the other requirements is that we have to spend not less than 20% of this funding on mitigation of learning disruption through evidence-based intervention. So that's another thing where we can't necessarily just amend or move things without considering that. And then there also are certain reporting and fiscal assurances that demonstrate maintenance of equity. So maintenance of equity, in this case, it requires that fiscal years 22 to 23 maintain a per pupil funding, combined state and local, for the top quartile of our high poverty schools. So we are set up to do this because with ESSER, Every Student Succeeds Act, that came about a few years ago, we are doing school-based per pupil funding for state and local. So we do have, and federal, so we have that data available to track this. And that's something that we're going to be doing, and we have to be strategic about going forward as well too. So next slide, please. So that.
Mr. Riley, I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind just explaining the asterisk in that slide? The previous slide.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So yeah, and I meant to explain this before too. So this we presented at the work session. So this is what was spent through February 14th last week, 2022. The asterisk is showing that actually as of this point, because the state plan hasn't been approved, we've only been awarded 168 million. So we're showing the whole 252 for ESSER 3, but from a cash perspective, that those funds aren't available. And I don't know if Tom or Yvonne, if we have an idea of when we expect that, but it should be, not too long off, but that is one of the other restrictions, that we don't have the full funding available until the state plan is approved.
Oh, okay. So we will get those funds then.
Yeah, it's really not in question. It's just they have to go through that process, and it takes a little longer.
Gotcha.
Another thing too on this too, while we have it here. So funds available. One of the things I wanted to clarify too, and I don't think I made this clear at the work session, is although it says 272.8 million there funds available, we have, for certain circumstances, such as the virtual academy, we've been using operating funds with the intention of moving those funds to ESSER. But the accounting transaction for that hasn't happened yet. So we actually don't have as much available as it is here, but that will happen within by the next financial monitoring, the next financial report, you'll see that actual, just to give you an idea. So there's a little lag of, when we move the funds from operating to ESSER. The other thing too, as Ms. Harris mentioned, part of what we're going to be doing over the next few years is looking at what's being spent in ESSER, and Virtual Academy is a good example. That's something that was determined that we do want to have in our operating budget going forward. There's a high demand for that, and it's proven to be effective. So that's what's we are already in the process of moving that into the operating fund. But there's obviously there's millions of other dollars and other programs that we're working on that are going to have to go through that same process. And we're really going to have to look at the effectiveness of what's being funded through ESSER and determine, is that something that we want in our operating budget? One of the things we said, it's not in our recurring operating budget because a lot of these funds are being used for non-recurring uses. When we really have to be careful when we do move it into the operating budget, it is going to be recurring. So it's going to be something that we have to really be sure that whatever we're doing or putting there is going to be effective and something for the long term.
And the one thing I would add to what Rob is saying is that this also allows the innovation to take place in terms of really meeting that mitigation of learning. You know, what are the ways that we can be more innovative right now with this funding? And even though we have those 14 specific areas that are the criteria we have to meet, it still allows, and I think ultimately for that mitigation and the innovation that can happen with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of other school districts across the country are using that strategy as well. So it does afford us an opportunity. You know, it's obviously it's relief funding, but it's something where we can kind of use that leverage to try things or pilot things and see what works the best for this purpose. Next slide, please. So here we just kind of gave you a little more detail of, you know, how these ESSER funds are broken out. This is ESSER 1. But you know, the funding was not as much and the uses were kind of limited. But the next slide will show ESSER 2 and then ESSER 3. These breakouts of where the funds are currently located, this is also on our website for transparency. If you go to our COVID-19 tab on the website, there'll be a section there for ESSER 3 funding information. And that not only shows our original application, which shows all the grant verbiage of what the intent of what we're doing with each of these funds, but it also shows the grant award. And like I said, we're also going to be presenting our financial report on a monthly basis to the board. That's going to detail out just what we're seeing here, like, you know, what's been spent, you know, what's available and what's currently being amended, just so we can kind of go through this together and explain these things as they come up, the change in needs.
Rob, could we go back to the previous slide for ESSER 1? So you'll see in the second line there that there's something called non-public. So ESSER 1 legislation required MCPS to share the ESSER 1 funding with the non-public schools in Montgomery County. And so that's where you see $2 million of the $24.8 million was allotted to non-public schools based on the number of students, Title I type students that are in non-public schools. That funding was based on that ratio or proportion. And so most of or all of that money has been provided to the non-publics through equitable services, and ESSERs 2 and 3 did not have that requirement. So it's just a unique line for ESSER 1.
Thanks, Tom. And that comes up sometimes because I was using the number 389.2 million, but you might hear 387.2, which doesn't take into account that other 2 million.
Rob, do you mind if I just touch a little bit on the amendments, because I want to make sure that we're talking, there's a difference. Sometimes the amendments are just technical changes and there might be amendments that really don't impact the program. So for example, you know, when you see an amount in the ESSER grants for summer school, right? And we might have budgeted 25 million for summer school. It could be that we have to submit an amendment as a technical change because maybe we're providing the transportation cost for summer school would increase and we have to do an amendment just to, you know, change the categories for that program, but doesn't mean that we're not going to spend that money in the program, right? So just because we have a technical amendment doesn't mean that there's going to be a change to how we are spending really the funds in terms of program. What really will have an impact is if we determine that we might have to cut a program because we need to fund something else. That is different and that might not really require an amendment as long as we're staying within the financial, reporting of the grants. So I just want to make that clear that, we might submit amendments that are just a technical thing and it's not really impact how in the programs that we're spending the money in.
Thanks, Yvonne, for clarifying that. But that is all I had. So if there's any other questions on ESSER or what our intent is, we're open to any questions on this.
It's Judy. I don't think I really have any questions on what you've explained, but I'm glad that you've shown the categories because we have even persons in the county executive's office saying that we have been given $400 million to take care of students who are not achieving or their opportunities, but it's only for mitigation having to do with COVID. It does not have anything to do with the students that were already not achieving. And that's another issue that we have, but it wasn't clear in that office. And I just hope that people understand that we are limited in how we spend the ESSER funds. And so it's good that you put all of the categories there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And one of the rule of thumb that I kind of been telling folks is it something we were planning on doing before COVID started? If so, then it really, wouldn't meet the criteria, right? Because the criteria is post-COVID.
So at one of our budget work sessions, you all broke out the amount of money that from ESSER that is going to highly impacted schools. And I asked the question, and I'm still, maybe it's, I'm still not clear on is, does that mean that because there were some like salary lines for teachers and other things, my question, I just want to make sure I'm understanding is that, are those funds that go over and beyond what other schools are going? I'm just trying to figure out sort of the equity approach to equity with this use of funding, and are we targeting it in particular to students in schools who are struggling the most?
And I can answer that. And I think you're referring to the line where we were talking about differentiated staffing and we had Focus Schools Title I. Is that what you're referring to? Or overall?
There was a category of highly impacted schools, I think was the category. And I think within that, there was a staffing line, but I think there were also some other things. And my question was, are those funds that are over and beyond what other schools are receiving, or is that, it was just hard for me to figure out what we're directing more towards those who need it the most. And
so let me just break it out for a minute, if you don't mind. So when we were talking about that differentiated staffing line, if you look in the budget book and their appendixes, we have a staffing guidelines. And when you go through those staffing guidelines, especially at the elementary level, right, we have different staffing levels depending on whether you're Title I or Focus or Focus. So that's what that piece covered. Then when you were looking, there were other lines there. Some of it was National Board Certified.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Windsor. So by that, do you mean that the funds that were under that category of going to highly impacted schools for staffing, that those funds are going to reduce the student-teacher ratio?
Correct. So we have a staffing guidelines, and at the Title I and the Focus Schools, the student-teacher ratios are lower. Also, the counseling ratios, there's different areas where the ratios are lowered at those schools. And correct, those funds go to support, those areas.
But those aren't those aren't ESSER funds though, are they?
Correct. That was under the operating budget
Okay.
line. And then we have some counselors, and we had also put some grants in there because we have about 38 counseling positions that are sitting currently in ESSER. And those are to meet the needs of those schools that need it the most, are not really need based on ratios. Those are assessed through farms and other things. That's how they're allocating those 38 positions. They're looking at the needs of the schools and taking several things into consideration. And that's the one that they have sort of phased out 12, positions this year. They have phased them out little by little to make sure that you don't have 38 positions vacant out there that cannot be filled. So they have been facing them, towards the schools, rolling them out. So
Okay,
that's what you have.
So 38 counselor positions are currently budgeted using ESSER funds.
Correct.
Okay, so aside from those 38, and those are only going to Title I or focus schools?
They're actually looking at most poverty impacted in terms of needs too. They're looking at, other needs. It might not be a title. It might not meet quite the criteria of a Title I of a focus school, but they're that borderline. And then they're getting that extra bump, using those ESSER funds.
Okay, so I'm sorry to keep pushing this, but I get asked the question of how are we using funds in an equitable way to support our most vulnerable students? And I'm not sure how to answer that question. Is there a way, and we don't have to figure that out right now, but is there a way to answer that question? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at.
Sure. And I think, and correct me if this is not what you're looking for, but I think what we say is, we do have different staffing guidelines that are very, that are differentiated, to meet the needs of those schools, those Title I's and those focus schools.
Okay.
To reduce the student teacher ratio, to reduce the counseling ratio, to reduce, the staff right now, no longer staff development and reading specialists, but other positions like academic intervention, there's positions that are especially allocated to those schools.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we can send it to you, but there's also in the budget book under Appendix C, you can see how that, some of those differentiations.
Okay, thank you. So just the last point, I guess, and then I'll stop. But I kind of mentioned this, was that last night? All the days are blurring together during the public testimony, that I think the system for a long time, and it precedes this administration and this board, has talked a lot about equity, but then when we actually make our decisions, I'm not sure that we're always making them in an equitable way. So for example, yesterday I raised the point about wellness rooms and the reading specialists, right? Which both are great, and I would love for all kids, all schools to have those. But if we're really talking equity, in my mind, and I know I'm speaking, I know you all understand this, but just to make my point, wellness rooms are really expensive as an intervention. And it seems like if we're going to be funding them in every single school, that's not necessarily the most equitable strategy, right? And similarly, I would argue we do need reading specialists in every school. But again, if we're really trying to target the schools that are serving the highest concentrations of students who are reading behind grade level, again, that may not be the most equitable strategy. So I just want us, I want to push us a little bit going into next year, probably more than this year, to start thinking about how we can use that, and then also recognizing that we have this huge cost hit coming up, right, with the whole blueprint. And I think we need to start making some of those strategic decisions and focusing on the schools that need them the most, so that we can meet the obligations under the Maryland blueprint. That's all I'll say. I'm sorry for that.
Well, I'm going to say something too, because I was most upset when I heard that every school was getting a reading specialist, which they should have, but some schools need it more than others. And did not get an answer about that as to what we were going to do for the other schools, other than what we're already doing with the folks in Title I and the ones right on the border. But it's just, it doesn't seem equitable to me either. And I support you on that, Scott. And that's something we have to look at. Now, this committee who is helping us, it's not their job. It really is our job to figure out how to do this and to insist that we do this, because I think that's important. And the other thing about the ESSER funds that I think is important also, and I guess it's in the material for tomorrow's meeting, the ESSER funds are shown on a chart, but then the funds that are in our regular operating budget are on the same chart. So people will know what is being covered by ESSER and what we are covering. And I guess the third thing is the 38 positions that Yvonne was talking about. They will be funded after ESSER is over. That's our understanding, that we are not just doing these for ESSER and then taking them away again. So we have to keep emphasizing that.
Yeah, and I think, all of your points are so well taken. And I go back to the statement I made earlier about being innovative with ESSER funding. Are there ways that we can continue to utilize this, because we certainly have not used it all, to meet those needs, to differentiate even more? And part of this is definitely going to be collecting the data, certainly as we move into the spring and at the end of this year, about what programs are working, what staffing models are working, what do we need to revisit. And I think this calls attention to that, especially now, because it is important that we take those levels of evaluation and use the data to really determine what is working and make the adjustments. The great thing about the ESSER funding is that you can make adjustments even within the designated categories through the amendments that Yvonne has talked about. And that would be the discussion to really have as we continue to grab some data moving into the end of the year to determine what is working. And then as we go into summer, which is a more focused summer school, as opposed to just everywhere, it's definitely focused on students whose needs have not been met and have higher needs. And we are really using that time to invest in those kinds of programs. So this is the time to really start to look as we are going into that end of the year to evaluate these things and see what is working. And the data is the most important thing that we can do to determine if the funds really speak to the needs.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I have just a couple questions. And just to preface it by saying, I think I've been really clear for a long time that in my mind, mitigating learning disruption, the foundation of that is supporting the social, emotional, and mental wellness needs of our students and staff. So I'm looking really, really closely at several. I'm going to hope that we see very detailed breakdowns of especially the ESSER 3 funds that we're planning to spend for mental health, strategic partnerships, support for newcomers, and wellness programs, because I really do deeply believe that is the foundation of any work to help mitigate learning loss and help students recover their learning. And so question we've been talking about, and I follow on a little bit of some of the things that Dr. Joftis was talking about. And I went online, because I know I've seen it and I thought I'd saved it and I can't find it. The very straightforward layout from the federal government of the 14 allowable categories of expenditure for the ESSER funding. Wondering though, we've talked about wellness centers in each high school. So we've got right now, after we finish Kennedy, we'll have wellness centers in 4, which leaves 21. And looking at the appropriateness, and I guess this is a question, we can't afford on the CIP side to go in and create 21 additional wellness centers in high schools. But, an appropriate use of ESSER funds could be helping to either outfit existing spaces in schools to provide the types of things that are required to do that work, which is things that will require hygiene and privacy and that kind of thing, but also looking at what we did at Summit Hall when we sort of created accessory space for a wellness center that was kind of a hybrid between an actual CIP project and just adapting existing space. And would ESSER funds be an acceptable use? Would it be an acceptable use of ESSER funding to do some of those kinds of projects as, you know, mitigating learning disruption by supporting social, emotional, and mental wellness needs of our students?
If I could just jump in, looking at the law and the allowable uses, it reads providing mental health services and supports, including through the implementation of evidence-based full service community schools. So I would think that's broad enough to cover what you're describing.
So that I mean, I think that's a conversation I'm going to want to have, because I think too that goes to creating, you know, using our ESSER funds in ways that is creating infrastructure that we can continue to use, and without necessarily having tremendous ongoing impacts on operating funding going forward. And then another, so this goes to kind of a wider conversation we've been having about the operating budget, and something that Dr. McKnight said last night when I asked a question in response to some of the testimony of folks asking that we expedite the expansion of the enriched learning, enriched literacy curriculum in our elementary schools. And one of the things that Dr. McKnight talked about was we wanted to make sure that we rolled things out to ensure quality going forward, and adapting, you know, kind of a formative evaluation, learning as we go. But she also mentioned something about, we were talking about the budgeting cycle, that going forward, we're looking to use sort of, and I don't even know, and I was talking to Mr. Riley about this earlier today, I'm not even sure that new is the right word, but a budgeting process that allows us to take sort of a quarterly look at actuals versus projected, especially when it comes to, like we've all talked about so much over the past 8 months, unfilled positions. We have to budget for what we need, but when we budget for what we need and then we can't fill, how do we adapt the use of that funding to meet the needs that we have when we can't meet them with the staffing allocations and the staffing positions that we created? And so can you talk just a little bit about that process and how we can use it to be a little bit more nimble in adapting the way we spend our resources in response to our actual needs and our actual circumstances?
Yeah, I'm thinking from what you're saying, Ms. Harris, is that one way to do that would be through the ability to use contracting services as a way to kind of test the effectiveness of something that we try. I guess one of the things that even though we have the ability of, you know, multi-years here, they're going to go fast. And my only concern is that some of the things that we're going to be looking at, we might not see effectiveness in year one. Some of these strategies might take 2 or 3 years, which it's going to create a little bit of a something we're going to have to like take into account, that we might not see what we want to see within that first year. But we do have that through the amendment process. We do have that ability. Is that what you're referring to? Or
no, I'm talking about our process writ large. As we budget for what we need, we can't fill those positions. We need to, instead of having all of that allocated funding, we're not spending because we can't find the people to hire. How do we, I thought we were talking about a process that let us look several times through the year at, okay, we can't hire 50 social workers, they're not there. But we still have these social, emotional, and mental wellness needs of students and staff to meet. What are some other programs, approaches that we could use to meet those needs, just not let them go unmet because we can't find the people that we budgeted to hire? So that I think is more what I'm looking at. And, especially when we've been talking about lately, the needs are crucial and they're now and we can't wait. And so if we're looking at, so we don't have all those clinical social workers and school psychologists, but we do have a lot of person power. And what are some things that we could do to empower students? We were talking about sources of strength as a program that might, provide some training, mental health first aid training for more staff and students, that kind of thing, that we could, use some of that funding for when we can't provide the people that we thought we were going to be able to provide with the money.
Or the telehealth would be an example as well. That's something that we're using ESSER funds for as well.
Yeah, but just as a way we do business with our operating budgets, ESSER aside.
Well, there's one thing also to keep in mind is that the county requires every year for us not to spend $25 million of our budget that's used to fund next year's budget. And so that $25 million often comes from the lapse and turnover of positions that we don't fill as quickly as we would like to. So we have to take that into account as we would look at what you're describing.
Yes, and I just want to add, to what Tom just said, in that financial report that we provide every month, we do look at category by category. And what that really helps us with is, it might be that we might not have been able to hire, all the positions, but then we've had additional expenses in other areas, in other programs that might have been higher than what we expected. So, we have to offset it, with some of those positions, surplus, right? Additionally, the operating budget is not as nimble as the grant, right? We're limited by categories. We can request transfers at the end of the year, but that's why our process is so important, that we really look at what we need and how to budget, so we allow that funding, wherever it's needed. Unfortunately, we have some flexibility, but the flexibility is not as high as with grant funds, where you can submit amendments and shift.
And if I could just quickly add, I had a poor choice of words. The county doesn't require us to do that. They put an expectation out there that we use $25 million of our current budget to fund next year's budget.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Tom, too, that number is not set in stone, and other school districts use a different number. Although, as Ms. Harris, as you mentioned, if taking that $25 million aside, we were very close at this point. I think it was $57,000. So it's a savings tool for us as well, too. But that number is not written in stone. So we could potentially look at ways to, maybe utilize that or adjust that number to meet some of our current needs. But that would have to be discussions with the county, obviously.
Okay. Any other questions, Dr. Daka, Dr. Joptis? Okay. So moving on. Sorry. Is just a little update, an issue that I've been talking to central office staff about for a bit, looking at the trend nationally towards providing the ability for LGBTQ-owned businesses to certify themselves and then receive the same sort of a consideration in procurement and contracting that women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses and businesses owned by differently abled people receive. And so in light especially of the fact that there's a bill in the General Assembly, HB 182, that would create that category at the state level. And it's a zero fiscal note bill that's already passed the House. I talked to some folks on the Senate side today, and since it doesn't have a cross file, what they're predicting is that it won't really get any attention on the Senate side until crossover day in late March. But this is something that we, MCPS, as an entity, wouldn't need the state to act on for us to do. So just getting just a little overview on the contract procurement side and how something like this would impact the work that we do on the procurement and contracting side.
Sure, I'm happy to provide just a quick update. Lynn, as we kind of learned about the bill recently and just that it's been referred to the Senate, in talking with our procurement team, it was really our understanding that the bill that would require that certification agency to compile and manage the list of the certified LGBTQ businesses on the state procurement contracts. And then use the list and publish it on its website. And looking at that bill, we had kind of talked through as well, looking at that main goal of not only identifying the businesses in the state that identifies LGBTQ businesses, but also encouraging, like you said, the outreach to the businesses on those contracts. In terms of looking at the legislation, learning that it would certify the business as LGBTQ owned if it was owned at least 51% by a member or members of the LGBT community. And that is really similar in how we look at the minority and female and disabled designation on those current procurement contracts. So we noticed that. Just kind of our next steps in procurement is learning more about the bill, learning how it would impact our current practices. I mean, currently we're reporting out contracts awarded to the minority businesses. And that designation is really given if 50% is owned by the minority group members. And so we report that currently as part of, a state requirement for Maryland school districts. We keep the records through our list of awarded contracts in that the $25,000 or more memo, and then we keep that available on the board docs through the agenda. That last page in the memo of the awarded contracts lists the number of vendors, the bids received, and that total number of the minority, female, or disabled bids. So in kind of looking at this bill, if we were to add that, we had thought that would be a place if we were adding LGBTQ businesses and kind of tracking those, that would be something that would fit in that place of the awarded contracts. We also share the information on the minority report summary, which then would include the construction contracts as now. As of now, MCPS reports out, but doesn't give preference into that. So in learning about the new bill, we would have to see what kind of changes, if any, need to be made there. The LGBTQ right now is not currently reported out because it did not have that certification process, but that would certainly change with the bill designating that business. We do the others, like I had shared, just because of that certification designation. Just in learning about the bill, I was interested and I guess curious to know if that's specific to state procurement contracts only, or if it would be required of all contracts for a school district. And I think we had shared this previously, but the procurement manual is up for revision next school year. So it's also something to consider if we're reporting out and adding LGBTQ businesses and designations in there. And that process is a little bit different than our county government. I mean, they have a separate minority, female, and disabled program. And we don't currently have that program in procurement, but we still are reporting out those designations. So that piece is similar, but the process is a little bit different. So I think with the bill and the designation, that's something that would fit into, right, as we currently report out, we'd be able to report out that information in a similar way moving forward.
Yeah, and my reading of the bill is it just creates the registry. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, because like I said, it's got a 0 fiscal note. So there's nothing else, no requirements to go along with it. It's just creating the category in the registry. So, I mean, I would just like to see us if we're revising our procurement manual anyway, I mean, it goes along with our core values and our strategic plan, equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So anyway.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that was just a point of information. Dr. Joptis, Dr. Daka, anything? Okay. All right. Moving on to the last thing, and my apologies because this was on our last agenda and I just blew right past it, but it's really important. Looking at where we are with our state audit, every 6-year state audit since 2005. And I think we should be at this point getting way to the end of that. So I will turn it over, I think, to Ms. Bergstresser and Mr. Riley.
Yeah, and there's a PowerPoint on here too. And I wish we were at the end, but we still have a little way to go. So if you can bring up the PowerPoint on the state audit update. And as Ms. Harris noted, it's as you see here, it is every 6 years. This is actually our third one. And it's really looking at operations and finance, nothing really program wise. And it kind of, it goes hand in hand with our annual audit, but it's more of a process or control audit rather than a financial audit. And I don't know, I guess it's just my nature. I kind of look forward to it because a lot of people are intimidated by audits, but I know I call myself a nerd because I actually look at it as a reason to improve. And if you go through an audit with nothing, there's really, it's telling you there's nothing to improve, but as we all know, we can all improve. And basically that's what I've heard so far. They have kind of done a draft discussion notes, but I didn't want to share the exact notes with the group so far right now, because reason being, some of these are their discussion notes, and I haven't brought it back to our operations and our finance folks to kind of confirm that these really are valid. So just to give you an idea, they spent more than a year here, inquiring and pulling records from our folks. And I was a little annoyed with them, to be honest, because our normal annual auditors, they got it down to a science. They have their PBCs, they're prepared by client. They know exactly what to ask us, and they don't ask multiple times. What's happened here, and the reason it's taken 14 months, is because they'll ask a question out of one of our folks, and then they'll come back with 2 or 3 more questions. And, they really, if they had asked, what they really wanted to in the first place, it wouldn't have dragged on like this. So that's just my complaint. Sorry about that. But next slide, please. So what they're looking at is all our different cycles. So our revenue and cash collection cycle, our purchasing and disbursement cycle, payroll and HR. And I let them know that we'll be implementing our new human capital management system in the next year or 2. They were very impressed with that. And, that's going to take us a long way, because what'll happen is it's going to address some of the things that they actually found. So, and they're looking at transactions, records, procedures, and they're doing a lot of inquiry with our staff. They're kind of walking through our process. And for the most part, we have our financial manual. Our processes are pretty set and then really good. But if you go to the next slide, I'll give you an idea of some of the things or where we're at. So I kind of looked at by a recommendation on a year to year. So our first one was January 2009, and there were 19 recommendations. Interestingly enough, sometimes when they do this for all the different LEAs, a lot of their findings are the same. So for instance, one, I think it was board oversight. What the finding was like, hey, you guys should have a fraud hotline. And we did, as well as most of the other I think all the LEAs have that at now. So that's why, I don't know if I would say I look forward to these audits, but there is a value to them. So if you look in January of 2009, we had 19 recommendations. In May of 2016, it went down to 16, which is a good thing. But the only thing there was 8 or 9 of those findings were actually repeat findings. And that's kind of like one thing you want to avoid when you're going through these type of audits. You want to show that, hey, we took what you recommended and put it into practice. So the good thing here, if you look in here, March 22, and like I said, these are preliminary discussion notes. It's 9 recommendations, but only 2 of them are repeat findings. So I felt that was a kind of a good gain there. And just to let you know, so it's saying 9 recommendations. The information technology, they actually do that audit simultaneously. So the functional operational side, usually IT finishes first. And the idea is that they'll marry those recommendations with ours for one financial report that gets published. So they're not done yet, IT. I'm going to be getting those discussion notes shortly, but we're kind of ahead of them right now. But right now you see there's about 9 recommendations that they made. But like I said, preliminary. I want to discuss it with our folks to make sure that they are valid. And then, there's nothing, because sometimes what might happen is there might be a misinterpretation, or they might have asked for something and then kind of put it on the back burner. We provided it later on and they didn't realize it. So we just want to make sure that whatever they say is a recommendation or a finding, is valid. So that's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. And then by the time we come back and meet, we'll have actual findings that we can kind of dig into and talk about corrective action, talk about how we can kind of mitigate any risks that were presented as part of these recommendations. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a current status. So like I said, it's been more than a year process of field work. Right now, they're in process of creating that final discussion notes. And then once that happens towards the end of March, we'll have a final report that we'll discuss. I'm assuming we'll kind of dig into it here in Fiscal Management Committee. And then if the need be, bring it to the full board with whatever is found. I wasn't here for the last one, so I didn't know how that was proceeded with, but that would be my recommendation, to kind of go through here first. Let us see what we can do, then dig into it. But that's all I had there. I don't know if there's any questions on the state audit.
Well, first I'd say, Rob, you are a nerd. But I mean, I very much appreciate the way you look at these, because it is an opportunity for us to learn and improve. And yeah, and I think you're right. This group is scheduled to meet again on the 21st of March, and then the next board meeting is the 24th of March.
Oh, so that should be perfect timing, the 21st.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So I will ask Dr. Daka, Dr. Joftis, any questions about that overview?
I don't have any questions, but I think at another fiscal management meeting, they went through the kinds of notes that were taken and where they needed to do some recommendations. And they gave more detail, which was really, this person didn't sign, or it wasn't secure enough. So I know how important this is, and it's even more interesting using it first.
Yeah, and I think with I'm really looking forward to the March 21st meeting where we really drill down into the findings, because I think it ties into a lot of the things that we've been having to deal with as a system over the past 6 months, and the things we've been talking about at the board table as well, about sort of our vision for where we're going. So yeah, is there anything else that we need to talk about as far as that, or that was coming attractions for March 21st?
Yeah, I was hoping that I had final ones, but like I said, it's been a long drawn out process. So it's just going a little longer.
Okay. That's it for me. One more chance for Dr. Joftis, Dr. Daka, any questions about anything, any additional items we should talk about with this August group before us?
Oh, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Yes, it's been really great listening to you. Thank you.
Okay, with that said, I think we are adjourned, and I look forward to seeing you all again at the magical Fiscal Management Committee meeting on March 24th. Don't miss it.
Everyone.